slide, we'll see some examples of interventions. Can we go to the next slide, please? So looking broadly at what kind of interventions can we advocate for that can support access, that can support school completion. And David Evans and Fei Wan in 2019 published this article called What We Learn About Girls' Education from Interventions That Do Not Focus on Girls. And the main premise, actually, it was recently published in 2022, and the research was done from 2014 to 2018. But their main premise is that if we focus on general interventions for both boys and girls, girls are going to benefit. So the study documented a number of general interventions that targeted boys and girls and other interventions that only targeted girls. They divided the interventions into 4 levels: the student level, the teacher level, school level, and community level. So school level, some of the examples of interventions at the school level, at the student level, was things like cash incentives, scholarships to private institutions, cash stipends to help students for transportation from and to the schools, sanitary hygiene, incentives that can help in making the school environment more welcoming. Some of the intervention related to curriculum were like tutoring services or math tutoring software or computer assisted language learning. So these are some of the examples that of the interventions they implemented in schools. For the teachers, some of the interventions included professional training or training in pedagogy, or even giving the teachers scripted lesson plans where the teachers could just follow the script and teach classes. One of the studies actually was conducted in Morocco, and it was a general intervention, in fact, that showed some positive results. Community interventions, things like creating village schools or community schools where multiple grades can take part, especially in rural areas with that don't have independent school systems, or they don't have public school system. So they created community schools there. What they found out was that the general interventions can have equal impact, and sometimes maybe even more impact, on girls' education and completion rate than targeted intervention. The other thing that they highlighted was that countries where the male education have high rates of male education, usually girls' education is right behind. So there's only maybe a 1-year difference. When there's a high level of male education, there's usually also a high level of female education. So they felt that if countries focused on only girl intervention or girl-focused interventions, that might create some tension in the communities, especially with families that have both males and females. Now, just to conclude, if we go to the final slide, I believe that education is a human right and has been recognized as such since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. No doubt that educating girls would benefit the society and the larger community, yet there is actually still little evidence that achieving gender equality in education would lead to gender equality in the workforce. So even though, and we saw that in Egypt, even though there is equal number of males and females studying at the university level, only 15% are contributing to the workforce. We have a lot more work to do that. Gender gap in education is both a symptom and a cause of gender inequality. And I want to leave you with a quote from one of my favorite author, may she rest in peace, Bell Hooks, where she says, the classroom can be a source of constraint or liberation, depending on the pedagogy. So I hope all of you here attending this workshop or webinar with us, may your classrooms always be a source of liberation for both male and female students. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruby. Next slide, please. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Mahal Aziri, coming to us from Singapore. So quite a different time of day there. She is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education, and also a graduate of Al Akwan University in Ifran. I hope that I pronounced that correctly. She is interested in issues related to inclusivity in education and has worked extensively over the past 10 years on issues of expanding access to early childhood education and early grade literacy in the Central High Atlas Mountains of Morocco. She is Moroccan. She is currently working on the creation of content for supporting the teaching of Moroccan Darija. I really apologize. You can correct when you come on. To the children learning it as a minority language around the world.
Assalamu alaikum. Sabah al khair. Thank you very much, Dr. Koyama, for having me here today. It's very hard for me. Can we go to the next slide, please? It's very hard for me to speak after Dr. Ghazal. First of all, because I'm not as experienced as her, and also because it's a very humbling experience for me to talk in front of professors of my home country. So thank you very much for having me. I am, as Dr. Koyama mentioned, a graduate of the University of Al Akhawain in Ifran and the University of Pennsylvania. I have, throughout my educational and academic and professional career, I always had an interest in the question of inclusion in education. Initially, I started my work by running a nonprofit in the High Atlas Mountains of Morocco, near Tabant and Ait Hamza, for the people familiar with the region. And the goal was, how can we expand access to education in general, especially in the early years, in the Central High Atlas Mountains of Morocco. And I have met some incredible teachers there. After my graduation from the University of Pennsylvania, I became very interested in the question of language, especially dialects, how languages can be a form of inclusion and exclusion. And especially since the birth of my son, I struggled to teach him Darija overseas. And I have started working over the past 2 years on creating content for children to help them with the learning of Moroccan Darija when they are in very low exposure environments. So the topic I've chosen today is gender equality in education in Morocco, inclusive policies and exclusive realities. I'm presenting this talk from a large part from lessons I have learned and conversations I've had with many teachers that I had the honor to meet, especially in the High Atlas of Morocco. And this idea of gender in education always comes back. But the reason I'm very thrilled to talk about it today is because I'm myself the product of the Moroccan educations, I would say. I would say it in the plural because Morocco as a country can offer very diverse educational experiences, varying from the socioeconomic income varying from urban to rural areas, etc. So I was lucky to myself experience 3 different systems in Morocco. I did my elementary in a public school, did my middle and high school, my elementary in a private school, my middle and high school in a public school, and my university in Al Akhawain. I was very lucky to join Al Akhawain for my higher education. So those 3 experiences were very different in their own, and both my parents were teachers. One was teaching for foreign mission, and my mom was teaching for public school. And through them, I realized that we cannot talk of education in Morocco in the singular. So we're talking about educations. So for the purpose of this presentation, when I'm referring to education, I'm referring to Moroccan public education as per the Ministry of National Educations. The second point that I wanted to discuss is and a question that always comes to mind when we talk about gender in education, leadership in education is what's the ultimate purpose of education? That also, I think, is a nuance that we have to clear. Are we talking about education from a free market perspective? Education from financial security? Are we talking about education from a Paulo Freire perspective as a form of freedom? Or are we talking about education from an Amartya Sen perspective as an expansion of people's choices? For the purpose of this talk, I think that I'm referring to education as the capacity to have financial security, to have your own thought, and to take your own decisions. And finally, something that struck me when I read the name of the series is Education and Leadership. And I was actually very curious. This is more of curiosity, how this association with education and leadership started, especially in the context of Morocco, because we have a lot of women leaders who actually never stepped in school. That includes the generation of our grandmothers and some of our mothers. And we also have women who have broken the glass ceiling and have actually sat in boards and had positions that the generation before us wasn't allowed to. So in this, I'm referring to the latter form of leadership, which is the leadership that is actually facilitated through education, but I don't see it as the singular form of leadership, because I think there are many forms of leadership other than the one we're discussing today. So can we go to the next slide, please? The next one, please. Yeah, so actually, I have studied various questions of education and gender in Morocco specifically, but today I want to talk about some broader Moroccan policies, policies that Morocco has an effect on gender equality in the classroom. So today, I want to focus on, or like give a very small historical perspective. After independence, Morocco is one of the countries that followed the path of the structural adjustment programs and decided to invest heavily on infrastructure, which was incredible. However, in the early 2000s, we realized that Morocco was lagging in terms of human development, because the development of infrastructure wasn't equal to the development of the human capital. Thus, Morocco started to focus more and more on developing its human capital with initiatives like the LINDH, which stands for the National Initiative for Human Development. I think that was a very pivotal role in Moroccan policies to recenter them towards the human. And why I think that LINDH was a very important turning point is that one of the key factors of human development, education, health, and income was education eventually. And Morocco has worked very hard to actually increase the educational services it offered to its citizens, especially one specific policy that I wanted to talk about is what I did my undergraduate research on, is conditional cash transfers, specifically the program Taysir that Morocco actually had started around 2009. So The power of this program that wasn't necessarily targeted for women was actually I testified it in a very small village in the High Atlas Mountains. And this is like a story I wanted to hear, I wanted to share with you. So I have been going to the same village in the High Atlas Mountains. It's called Ishbaken for many years because my parents used to like to visit it. And actually it was like an official data point for me to track the evolution of enrollment rates in rural areas and remote areas of Morocco. In 2000, early 2000, 2002, 2003, there was only one classroom in that village. There was one male teacher and there was very, very low female attendance. I can tell you now that the last time I went, there are 7 classrooms. There are more than 60% female students in each class, and more than that, they are outperforming their male counterparts. There are many reasons for this. Of course, the conditional cash transfers were a big incentive. Of course, they incentivize the parents to send their children to school, but you cannot give cash always. There is a very important detail that I wanted to shed light on. Like in parallel to very big policies, there are also very small initiatives that matter. The teacher in that village, Mr. Lahsan, and the teacher in the following village, Mrs. Hesna, were incredible in talking to the families, talking to the parents, in building trust. Because one of the reasons why parents weren't sending their daughters to school was a question of trust more than it was a question of cash. That actually experience, seeing the complementarity between a big state action like conditional cash transfers and small initiatives like hiring the teachers that actually know the importance of community and importance of the communication and having a dialogue with the community. It's equally important as it's a transmission of knowledge. For me, one of the winning duos in increasing or breaking the barriers for girls' education. The second big topic that actually I wanted to talk about is the efforts of Morocco in increasing education equality, especially in higher education, and creating more opportunities for girls. I do remember in my last year of high school, when I got my baccalaureate, Morocco launched an initiative to train 10,000 engineers. Many of my classmates got scholarships to go to engineering school, notably in AUI, and many of them are thriving worldwide. This initiative was not necessarily targeted towards women only, but because women by nature are outperforming men in STEM fields, as proven. The latest report of UNESCO for 2021 about equality, about closing the gap in STEM education in the MENA region actually shows how Morocco is one of the countries that has the highest per capita female engineers. And I think these policies, when they're launched, they're not necessarily targeted toward women, but the hard work of women and their capacity to actually perform very well leads them to breaking the glass ceiling. The third topic that I actually wanted to talk about, and this is probably the most recent, is the compulsory education in the Moroccan curriculum, as in early childhood education is also becoming part of compulsory education in Morocco as of recently. There is an increasing awareness of the importance of the early year in creating equal chances, in creating equal opportunities for learning, in allowing the students to actually build their school readiness skills that will allow them to perform properly in elementary school. It's very important to know that there was an increase within 2 years of 14% enrollment globally in rural areas in early childhood education since this has been launched. So I think that to summarize, Morocco has been doing great efforts in actually expanding access to education. And the good collateral win, I would say, is that also meant that a lot of women have been benefiting from this, from early childhood to elementary up until higher education. The classroom, I think, in the Moroccan context can be looked as a laboratory for equality. I don't think that there is a difference. You can correct me, I could absolutely be wrong, between a girl and a woman and a boy in access to primary education in urban areas. Of course, there will be always socioeconomic challenges, there will be poverty, there will be the urban rural gap, but we have 94% enrollment rate in elementary school as as of the latest data. So I do think that we are closing the gap when it comes to the doors that we open for these girls to enter the educational opportunity. However, I don't think that we can keep them very long. We open the door for access, but how we have a lot of filtering mechanisms that make us lose a lot of our brightest women. One of these filtering mechanisms is the very low margin for failure. For women who fail their high-stake exam, there is very high risk that they will actually leave schooling. For rural women who fail their 6th grade exam, there is a very high chance they wouldn't repeat it and they will just stop learning. Same for 9th grade high-stake examination, and same for the baccalaureate. The big high-stake exams that Morocco has can be one of the big filtering mechanisms that make us lose a lot of our bright women. The second thing is actually the very lack of opportunities for second chances. Morocco has opened the path for many women to enter the educational system and to have equal opportunities. However, the margin to fail and to restart the second chance school, the second chance to reintegrate the system for any reason are still very limited. Next slide, please. As a Moroccan, as a product of the system myself, I do feel that I had equality in the classroom. I do feel that equality in the classroom was an ideal I would hope for society to also reflect. I would love that the equality I had at home was at school was also translated at home. For the note, my brother wasn't bothered to do any course when he was on holidays, while I was expected to help, knowing that I have very liberal parents. The second thing is also, I wish that the equality we had in the classroom, it also translated in the customary law. If a Moroccan woman divorces, she's not the main parent of her children. She will keep them as in Hadana, but she won't have the kafala. And that makes a very big difference for women who are equal in the classroom to their male counterparts. Finally, and before to conclude, I think it's very important to talk about the males who's, no, sorry, to conclude. It's very important, I think, as a conclusion to know that there are two definitions for women in Moroccan society. There is the classroom definition of womanhood, which is according the same as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And there is the definition of womanhood and their customs and statutory laws. And this two duality is actually sometimes very hard to combine, especially at an individual level. I do hope that the classrooms set the ground for a more equal societies outside of the classroom for us. I do hope that Moroccan women will have more opportunities to expand their choices, follow their careers or their choice of motherhood, etc., and always have the right to bounce back. I do recognize that these problems are not exclusive to Morocco. They are part of the global ecosystem where we live. But I do have hopes for my country. And I hope that with the next generation of teachers like yourself, we will be able to build this hope together. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Moha. That was so informative for me. I learned so much. Thank you. Now we're going to open it up to questions, and you can put those in the Q&A. You can put them in the chat. We already have one for our panelists, so let me read it. Women's leadership poses several problems in rural areas, especially in conservative societies. I see you're nodding your head already. But do you not see that working on cultural aspects is the solution to overcoming the negative view of women's leadership? So 2 parts, specifically in rural areas, conservative rural areas, and culture, and how can we get to leadership through some changes in culture? Either of you?
Maha, why don't you start?
I think that women leadership does exist in rural areas. As I mentioned earlier, there are many forms of leadership. But if we're talking about education facilitated leadership, there is a very interesting article to read written by Dr. Katja Van Elliot, which is Disempowering Education, which I think is a very good and critical read. It talks about how education in some rural areas and in some contexts can actually be a barrier to going ahead with the rest of your life, because the girl is not educated enough to be actually able to pursue a career and be financially independent. And her education in itself can be threatening in the context of her getting married, setting a family, etc. I think it will take us a while to get over this. It's part of who we are. I think we should not forget the power of religious clerics all over Morocco who actually do their job in explaining the importance of women equality and the importance of giving women their place in treating them as equal. So I think that we will eventually get there. There is no silver bullet solution, but I think it's a work of progress that all societies go through.
I totally agree with you. A couple points to add. I actually view our Middle Eastern societies as mostly matriarchal rather than patriarchal societies. If you look at, like Maha said, there are different forms of leadership. In extended families, the matriarch actually is the highest power in the household. The grandmother or the mother-in-law is the one with all the decision-making powers. They are the ones who distribute chores around the house. They are the ones who manage the budgets. They are the ones who make decisions on marriages and make decisions on even education choices. So I am also a product of the Egyptian education system. My family was very progressive. I did not go to the public, to the K through 12 public system. I went to a public school, a public university for my undergraduate. And I found my parents to be very progressive, but the person who made the decision in our household was my mother. You know, she decided what college I went to. She decided what field me and my sister wanted to study. And the way we managed that was, you know, we had to go around it. She wanted us to be doctors, not the doctor I am now, but more of a medical doctor. She wanted me to be a medical doctor. Now, in order for me, I could not say no, but what I did instead of saying no is I studied literature and liberal arts in high school. So in Egypt, you decide whether you go to the STEM field or you go to humanities and liberal arts. So I went to humanities and liberal arts, which automatically disqualified me from going to medical school. That was my way of kind of telling my mom, no, I don't want to be a medical doctor. But so going back to the question, I actually think that women, particularly in rural areas, have a lot more power than we think. I think if we can channel that power with the same example you gave, Maha, with the teachers and building community consensus and building trust, if we can work at that community level, we can achieve a lot more.
Thank you both. And knowing your mother, Rahab, I would not tell her no. Not only does she make decisions for Rahab, she also made decisions sometimes for me. It was more than welcome, though. And I just want to thank both of you for bringing to light the multiplicity of leadership and how we're defining that, and that it does not necessarily need to be an official status or role, but that women are quite capable and eager to, and are leading. The next question turns what we're talking about a bit on its head. I'm going to read it verbatim. Do you not see that women are one of the obstacles to the development of women themselves? Is it not the woman who contributes through education to the reproduction of the same patriarchal culture?
I'm going to start, if you don't mind, because I was just talking about this. I have it actually in my notes, but I didn't mention it. I said, women are women's worst critics. And I'll give an example of the political participation in women and some social change. Back in the 1980s, at the time, Jihan Sadat, the first lady, wife of late President Anwar Sadat, wanted to bring to the parliament a law that gave women the right to divorce themselves. At that time, the Muslim Brotherhood women actually took to the streets and protested, calling the initiative sacrilegious, calling it against our Muslim faith and our tradition. However, 20 years later, in the early 2000s, and under the leadership of late President Hosni Mubarak, Suzanne Mubarak brought back the same law. But this time, she brought religious clerical figures from Al-Azhar and from Al-Ifta, Dar al-Ifta, which is the high power that I don't know how to translate that in English. Rashid, if you can help me, that would be great. But it's a ministry in Egypt that actually gives decisions on religious issues. And she brought scholars, Islamic scholars at the time, and everyone, only 20 years later, said that is within the religious rights of women. They started coming up with all the stories from early Muslim history to prove that it was a woman's right to ask for divorce and be granted divorce without the consent of a husband. We call it il-khula in Egypt, which is a woman's right to divorce herself without the approval of her husband. So I agree. I think women, even in my research study, it was funny. I had 3 groups of females that I interviewed: undergraduate students, graduate students, and teachers. And of course, the age gap was huge. The teachers in my study were criticizing the young females and the young generation females that took to the streets and were camping in Tahrir Square, calling the actions inappropriate, against societal norms, and really wanted to said that if they want to protest, they should protest within boundaries. This is the word they use. They should protest within boundaries. So they wanted to set societal norms even on everything, starting with marriage and family relationships to political participation of women. So yes, I absolutely think that women are the women's worst critics. I think we should, like in the first question, we should work on societal cultural training, cultural competency training, and women empowerment training. But we have to tread carefully also. We don't want to antagonize this group of people, because they have also, those older people have a lot of power in the family.
I agree absolutely with you. A small thing I would add is sometimes as a form of love, there is a desire to give safety, and the predictability is also a form of love. So sometimes it's a bit hard to go countercurrent. So probably women, by recreating the patriarchal paradigms, are not necessarily doing them as of evil, but probably it's very much harder to stand against currents, and sometimes they prepare you for the reality that's waiting for you. I'm not by any means defending them, but probably this is a justification to why they're still around us. But the other, on the first question on how women can perpetuate this, like womanhood is by no means a key access to believing in the universality and the equality of being. Being a woman doesn't mean that you're going to be pro-woman. I think what we're talking about here is that believing in the universality of humans and that we all deserve to be equal. It's not about being a man or female, it's about believing in it or not. So I think the cutting point is not gender-based, but the cutting point is whether you follow it or you don't.
Yeah, thank both of you. I have 2 more questions. I'm just going to read them in the order in which I've received them. So over the years, we note that the candidates to enter the centers are females. Therefore, does a profession have its own merit, or is it an appropriate side issue for dealing with children? I'm not sure I understand that question. Do either of you? No? Maybe could the person who submitted that just clarify for us, for me, what centers are?
Oh,
Yeah, I think that refers to the centers for training future teachers. So
Okay.
it's they're talking about the centers where they work.
Thank you. Someone.
I have something, actually. I've been thinking about this topic for various of reasons recently. First of all, when I went to the University of Pennsylvania in my class, we were many women versus very few men. So probably this is not an issue in education in Morocco specifically, but if you go to any school of education in America, you will see that actually there is a larger proportion of female than male. So the other detail is in Singapore, actually, it's very rare to find male teachers, especially in early childhood education, to the extent that it was on the news about this male teacher in early childhood education. On the other side, I work in a French school, and there were many male in early childhood education. But actually parents, especially Singaporean parents, do not want their children to have male teachers, which came for me as a shock. So this question is teaching a female job. I think historically women have been teaching more because in the very early year of the institutionalization of education, you kind of had that mother figure as a way to transition between teaching at home and teaching at school. But I don't think, especially in Morocco, I had a lot of male teachers in elementary, in high school. I don't think it is a job for females, or that we're inclined for that on a policy basis.
Thank you. Should I go to the next question? Okay. Women and girls in Arab countries in general still suffer from the restrictions of the prevailing customs, traditions, and culture imposed by the women themselves. Do you not see with me that the spread of illiteracy among women, especially villagers in Arab countries, worsens the situation? Because it is the woman who educates the man. Therefore, if we do not educate her, she will continue to educate according to the prevailing male pattern, and to educate the girl and prepare him for the inner space, and educate the male as deserving of the outer space.
absolutely. I think I totally agree with this comment. Very insightful. I think if we have to start with raising awareness from within, and it would extend to the outer space. Private spaces usually shape also public spaces, and training mothers, like what Maha, the example you gave, that you had equality in the classroom, but when you went home, your brother didn't do any of the chores, or you were doing most of the chores. That is unfortunately still very prevalent in many families in the Middle East. I don't know if it is the case in the United States or Western countries, but we have to create a shift in the mind, in the framework of how we see gender roles in public and private spaces. I know that there has been a lot of research done on domestic violence, health awareness, well-being in the Middle East. There has been a lot of funding coming from non-governmental organizations to support awareness raising, rights of women, communication and dealing with domestic violence. So I totally agree with the person who had this comment. There is a lot more work to be done. And I think through webinars like this and through the hard work of teachers like you, we can make small but hopefully sustainable changes in our societies.
Thank you. Maha, did you want to add anything?
Thank you. I agree with both Dr. Ghazal and the person who commented. I think just say thank you. Dr. Ustada Nuzha, thank you very much. The only thing I would say is I would dissociate it from literacy itself. I think there is a difference between wa'i and ummiya and wa'i, or like between consciousness and learning or education. I think these are two different things. We do have a lot of illiterate women who are with a lot of consciousness and very pro-women, and do defend women and create spaces and push glass ceilings and break glass ceilings, etc. So the only nuance I would add is that it's not only a question of education, it's more a question of why, being aware and engage in these issues.
Thank you. I always find such provocative and interesting questions in these webinars. So thank you for those who are asking. And of course, thanks to our experts for offering their perspectives. Here's the next question. It is true that women in conservative societies have a soft power through which they can take many decisions. But what about economic and political empowerment? As is the percentage of women who bear the leadership of educational institutions, as the reality confirms the distance of women from actual leadership? This question speaks directly to some of the comments that you've made about leadership.
Actually, can you please read the question again? I think I missed the part. Thank you.
Yes. It is true that women in conservative societies have a soft power, as you've both spoken about. But what about economic and political empowerment? The percentage of women who bear the leadership of educational institutions, as the reality confirms the distance of women from actual leadership. So I think that posing the question of holding official positions, but maybe not necessarily having the actual power of that position.
And this takes us back to a contribution into the workforce, for example. So when we look at the attainment of higher education in Egypt, it's almost 50% of all college enrollments are females, but only 15% are part of the workforce. However, if we look at lower socioeconomic groups, particularly in Egypt, you'll find in studies of economics and in financial impact, you'll see that the primary breadwinners in lower socioeconomic groups is the female. So the females are the ones who are working to support families. Many of them are single parents. Many of them have girls, child labor, unfortunately, at the ages of 10 and 12 that go and work as domestic help. And many of this group of people, unfortunately, barely finish primary school or finish the mandatory school education, and then they have to go and support themselves. I think the World Bank and some again of international organizations started a lot of programs, micro loans, microeconomic loans that would impact the independence of women through, I can't remember the name of the bank, but in Egypt, it's the agricultural bank, for example. So a woman can go and, for example, ask for $1,000 loan to start a sewing business, or to start a knitting business, or to start a small kiosk of something. And they found that the impact of those micro loans on the economic growth of that community was very significant. So there are traditions, and I think Singapore and Southeast Asia is way ahead than the Middle East in this field, where women can get those micro loans to start entrepreneurial, very small businesses. And this is how they're impacting their society. I don't know if I went off on a tangent, or if that is part of the answer. But I think empowerment can come in multiple ways, and definitely financial stability or financial freedom we all aspire to. But by providing those small businesses, microloans can help in our countries.
Thank you. Or shall I move to the next?
We can move to the next. Yeah.
Okay, these are comments rather than questions. So they want to thank you for the deep presentations. I think discussing this topic is a way to justify in order to get validation and support from males. However, women are leaders in many fields, as you've both noted. They exist, they are hardworking, and they don't need to prove it. The second comment is somewhat linked. I think women need fairness, or I would say equity, more than equality. Do either of you want to comment on those comments, or shall I move to the next question?
Okay. Oh, Dr. Ghazal.
Oh, I was going to comment actually on the last comment, because I believe I saw the comment about equality versus equity. And I think I see equality and I see it on a spectrum, you know, so I think we start with equality, or we aspire for equity, but we need to understand equality and the difference between equality and equity. I think equity is a higher level order and would require a lot more in-depth interventions. And I don't know if the society is ready to look at that right now. Middle Eastern society, you know, when I mentioned that multi-country study, the way the authors and the NGO presented the finding, they were celebrating that 25% of the males in that study supported gender equality. I found that to be very disappointing. So it's at a time when, you know, in the 21st century, when males and females are, for the most part, equal contributors to the financial institution and family, even if they are homemakers, you're still contributing financially to the fabric of the society. And only 25% see a one-dimensional view of gender and equality. I find that a little bit disappointing. But at the same time, I don't think we can get to equity without passing through equality first, because I think people need to understand the difference and need to start with issues of access and opportunity. We have been, you know, by virtue of having a college degree, everyone in this webinar is actually considered part of the elite of our societies. We are privileged because we're part of a small percentage of well-educated individuals, a privilege that is not granted to everyone, unfortunately, despite the fact that in many of our countries, education is free or highly subsidized. Thank you.
Just a clarification from, I believe, the participant who made the first comment. And I think I interpreted it correctly, but here's a clarification. I mean, it's a male problem and has nothing to do with females. So thank you for that. I'm going to ask the next question. It is very similar to one that we had before, but maybe a bit more succinct. So I will just add that both of you talked about women's agency and what women can do. This participant is going to push you a bit and say, don't you see that the woman is the one who chooses her situation, because she is the one who raised the man and the future woman?
I think just to give a very little bit of context for all of us, if we imagine, especially a woman among us, for me, like for instance, I have a picture with me, my mother, my grandma, and my great-grandma, my late great-grandma. And then when I look at the opportunities that were offered within 4 generations in Morocco in a record time, I realized that that took 100 years in other places in terms of the expansion of opportunities for women. This is not by any means but to undermine the question, but the opportunities we were given came in too fast for customs to change at the same speed. We will still have generation of women or two who will still raise little men who probably don't believe in equality, don't believe that they're equal to their fellow female classmates, etc. These things take much longer to change than the opportunities that got offered to us over the last 60 years. So it is happening, it is normal to happen, but the goal is to make it less and less as time goes.
Thank you. Here's a comment to both of you. It's a thank you to both of you for sharing today and offering your perspectives and your expertise. Are there any other questions?
Thank you.
Can I comment on the last bit? I don't know, and I'm just going to give and please, Jill, correct me if I'm wrong. So I think even if we looked at Western society, I think many, and I did not want to talk about religion in this webinar at all, but if we really go back to the roots of Muslim faith. And the Middle East, I think part of the issues in our society is the wrong interpretations of and the overlap between religion and culture in the Middle East. I think if we look at the faith as such, you'll find that the faith has given women equality, equity, and empowerment and rights. And we always say, Al-Jannah tahta aqdam al-ummahat, meaning the path to heaven is through the mothers. So right there, our society honors women. The society and the religion honors mothers. But then I think it's how the political forces and the rulers from early on tried to control the society through the suppression of women. So if with women's suppression, and they used religion as a vehicle to enforce this suppression of women in order to control the society. So all the very strict interpretations of religions came at a time when the rulers were trying to take a hold of the society and control the society, in my opinion. But then if we looked deeper, we'll find that religion actually, if we follow religion truly, it is more empowering than anything else. Looking at the United States, the right to education, for example, was in the late 1800s. It took maybe 40 years or so for women to gain. So they had the right to education, but then they didn't have the right to vote. And then when women had the right to vote, still at that time, biracial marriages, for example, were illegal, and Black Americans did not have the right to vote. They did not have many of the rights that other United States citizens had, and that went on till the 70s. So even when we look at the American history and women empowerment, it took almost a decade, to give African women the same rights as white men in this great country. So even though there's progress in so many areas, the right to vote and the right to equal education, and to date, it's not equal pay. We still talk, there's so much research and there's so much work being done on equal credential and equal pay for, even at the academic level, as a female academic and administrator. I am pretty sure that if it were a man in my same position, they would be paid at least 10 or 20, maybe even 20% more than what I am paying. So I think it's like Maha said early on, it's a global issue. It's a global concern, but we all can do our parts. We all work on making small changes that can hopefully in the future have huge impacts.
Thank you for drawing our attention to the unevenness of change and women's roles. I'm going to close with a question that centers our participants again. But before I do that, I just want to remind everyone that there will be a survey put into the chat, and taking that then will allow you to get your certificate. I don't forget to say that. Here's the last question. How, as trainers of future primary teachers, can they support the empowerment for women? That's a big question.
I would allow myself to jump in. And honestly, the best I have seen in creating this equality in the classroom and the community has been facilitated by teachers. The teacher I actually told you about, that Mr. Lahsan, that I still in very close contact with, because I find him as a revolutionary, how one person can create that much change. Not only increased enrollment rate in the village where he was sent, but he actually, because normally you spend 2 years and you go back, he decided not to go back because he realized that the power of the impact he's having in that specific village. If a girl doesn't come to school, he would go and check on her home if she's okay. So when I think there is the teacher and there is the human. And I think if you leverage the power of your humanity in making sure that your students are equal, in allowing them to dream equally, to work hard equally, and to aspire to equal futures, I think you're capable of achieving a lot, much more than you think you're able to.
Thank you. Rahab, did you want to add anything? Okay. I want to thank our two experts. I've learned so much. I know the participants have also from their comments. Thank you, Maha, for staying up till almost midnight, your time. And I thank all the participants, everyone who was helping behind the scenes for making this webinar happen today. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Merci.
شكرا بزاف. يوم سعيد. سلامة.
شكرا.